First off, couple of welcomes, if I can. First of all, our new Chief Exec, Susan Halliwell. Susan, welcome. Nice to see you, nice to meet you. And also we have a new parent governor. I have a spiel that I've been given, so I'll read it, Victoria. So it says here, as members of the Commission will be aware, is agreed that 2 parent governors should be appointed to both the Education, Skills and Growth Overview and Scrutiny panel and the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, respectively. There is currently a vacancy for both the primary and secondary school posts, which arose in light of resignations of Tracy White and Mark Glanville, if we remember, who were very good with us. During the latest round of recruitment, 1 nomination was received for the primary school parent governor vacancy by the deadline, which prevented the need for a postal ballot. The successful nominee was Victoria Hill, who is currently a governor at Jennets Park Primary School. Victoria, show yourself, as we all know. Welcome. Hope you enjoy your time with us.
Thank you.
And feel free to join in. Don't.
Yep.
It says, therefore, on the 30th of November, Council will consider the appointment of Victoria Hill as a parent governor representative to the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. It is recommended that, subject to Council's decision to appoint Victoria Hill to the Education, Skills and Growth Overview and Scrutiny panel, you wrote this, Joey, didn't you? This will be confirmed at the Commission meeting on the 12th of January. In the meantime, please can we all give Victoria a warm welcome, which we're very pleased to do. So that's that. Next, we move to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I'm aware of Councillor Mattock, who's on holiday. I've had an email of apologies from Councillor Ballyboe. Tina Mackenzie-Boyle was... She's online. She's online, is she? And so is Mike Gibson.
Hello,
Hi,
good evening.
Good evening, both. Thanks for joining. Are there any other apologies that we're aware of? I think that really gives us a full set, doesn't it? So that's nice. We move on to item 2, minutes to the previous meeting, which are on pages 5 to 12. Are there any questions? Nope. Then I take it that we are all in favour of receiving those minutes. Yep. Is that carried, everybody? That's fine, thank you. They're carried. Declarations of interest and party whip. This is echoing again. Okay, well, I'm not going to read that all out. We all know what the words are. So that's, are there any declarations of interest? All right? Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? It's still on.
Somebody got the volume on their laptop.
Speakers on their computer. That's the problem. You get a held back.
Try again. No? Yep. Okay. Fine. No declarations of interest? Move on to item 4. There's still an echo. There's still an echo around. No. Is it yours, Peter?
Chair, Chair, can I just point out that it's very clear on the hybrid?
Clear on the hybrid. Okay, thanks, Tina.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's all right now in the chamber as well. Peter, I think that's £10 to the Mayor's charity, don't you? Oh, 20 then. Okay, item 4, urgent items of business. I'm not aware of any. Is anybody else?
I can confirm that I've not received any urgent items of business.
Okay. Public participation. Not aware of any.
No, Chair, I'm not aware of any public submissions either.
Then we move on to item 6, main item of the evening, which was the context setting of the budget. I think, first of all, Susan, it looks like your name's mentioned first, so I'm going to look to you to lead us in.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. I was just going to set out the context by which the budget is set, and the strategic context, just by way of framing this conversation. The council every 4 years will set a council plan, and we are currently working to a plan that was set 2019 up to 2023, and it has a series of strategic themes, of which I'll just read out the key themes. They are communities, protecting and enhancing the environment, caring for you and your family, education and skills, economic resilience and value for money. And so the council, through that council plan, and then the annual business plans that we develop within the directorates, will deliver against those key strategies. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we have a balanced budget each year. That's the responsibility of our Section 151 and myself, and the council as a whole, to agree that against those commitments that we've made. Now, I think we're all aware of the context by which we are working in at the moment, and the external financial context, and that is challenging, to say the least, I would say. So I think from the conversation that the presentation that Stuart will provide, sorry, I've got a real tickle in my throat, bear with me. I was trying really hard not to cough right next to my colleague, so I do apologise, Stuart. So sorry. So within that strategic context, the budget, the council needs to look very carefully at what it's spending, both in year and then what it will forecast to spend against those strategic priorities going forwards. The financial context for all local authorities at the moment is very, very difficult. We are, like every other organisation, and indeed families across England are dealing with the cost of living, inflation, and serious demands on our services. So we need to manage that within that context. And so the information that you will see tonight and the evidence before you will present some very strong and robust financial management processes that I believe this council has. And it takes very seriously the decisions that it needs to make sure that it maintains a very strong financial position despite those external factors that we're having to manage. So what I would also say is that the Chief Exec receives, I'm new to the authority, so I've been here 4 weeks, but within the process that we have solidified within the organisation, the Chief Exec will receive a quarterly report on the performance against those strategic themes, and that includes the financial context in which we're working in. And so a lot of the information that you see before you is within that context as well. I would also say, as a new Chief Exec, and looking at the information that I've been provided and reviewed whilst I've been here, but also leading up to taking on this role, that I do see this organisation as being very well managed financially, and it's in difficult times, but it's been managed very, very well up to this point.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Can I just ask you a question in terms of past experience and authorities. In these papers, it's telling us about our reserves, that we got 18.4 million in the future funding reserves, and we got 11.3 in general. That's 29.7 million in reserves. What's your view on that compared with other authorities that you've worked with locally? Is that large, small, normal?
I think the answer is it varies. So from my experience in the authorities that I've worked with, very much depends on the previous financial positions and the opportunities that have been afforded to those authorities. So there are some that I've worked with that have perhaps had higher reserves, and some that have taken decisions or actually not been able to have afford the decisions to add to their reserves because of the demand on their services. So I think it's a real mixed picture out there from my experience.
Who's Peter?
Thanks,
Councillor
Chair.
Hayden, as we're streaming, I'll make mention, so as anybody's recording it.
Thank you. Well, I don't need to say I'm Councillor Hayden then, you've already done it. Thanks. Thanks, Susan. I don't want to repeat anything you said. I was getting a bit worried at one point, but it's really the next level down. Some of it is put it in context, and it's always useful to remind everybody about the budget cycle, because it's one of the cycles which we live by. As everybody knows, it's around the fiscal year, and the preparation for next year's budget starts typically around July, August this year, when we're not even halfway through the current budget. So again, Stuart and his team pedalling twice as fast all the time. Obviously, because we're still in current year, there's the other key factor is that there's a constant monitoring against the current year performance. But in terms of preparation, it's normally in draft by October, following the autumn statement, which is due, is now due on the 17th of November, which it's always key prior to the final settlement, usually just before Christmas, because we have to agree and put forward a balanced budget by, is it the 14th of March? Or certainly early-ish in March, isn't it? There is a statutory date when we have to do it by. Just to remind everybody that while we have to produce a balanced budget, we have always delivered to our budget, which is actually slightly different. In fact, can be significantly different. So we've got an unbroken track record there. I feel sometimes as though we're crying wolf, because we've always got budget pressures. And it's like, here we go again. But I've been a councillor now for 12 years, so that's more or less matched the period of austerity that I've always lived in austerity, and it has got worse for a number of factors, and everybody's aware of it. But the traditional difficulties for the local authority environment is that we have very tight timescales to prepare a budget when we don't get the final settlement till Christmas, and everything's got to be readjusted and, if necessary, recalculated to produce a statutory budget within within 3 months is actually, given the complexity of a unitary authority, is quite a task. There's always been a tradition of making an annual settlement rather than, ideally, at least a 3-year settlement, so it does affect planning because there's a lack of certainty there. And even within 12 months, I think we've not had uncertainties like we've actually faced in the last 12 months, never mind the last 3 years. It's also recognised that the funding of local authorities is overdue to be radically brought up to date. I sometimes think it's just too difficult, which is why it keeps on being put back. But we're still waiting for the fair funding to be resolved, which will actually give us more certainty, and giving us more certainty will give us more control. I hope nobody's crying yet. But in addition to that, the government, bless them, continue to reduce our funding. So it's all very bleak. And also, they keep on telling us what a great job the a local authority marketplace is doing, but they won't give us the control that we would like to have, like being able to set our own business rates without according to our needs, and more independence. And also, one of the key areas is business rates. We're a tax-raising authority, so a very significant part of our revenue gets redistributed. And of course, when you do that, you're not going to satisfy everybody. So that's always a tension point. And sometimes the government aren't that sympathetic. They often make assumptions and then adjust their settlement to us accordingly. So they assume that we're going to deliver 1,000 houses when we struggle to deliver 300, say. That's one example from a few years ago. So they assumed we'd have all this revenue, which was never there, which was, wasn't very helpful at all. So the pressures, as always, it's balancing and agreeing the statutory budget. And there's also there's this constant tug of war between what's statutory and what's discretionary. A good example are libraries, which is, I think, most of the members' favourite subjects, is I understand we could put a couple of books in a telephone kiosk in the middle of Bracknell, and that might actually satisfy the statutory requirement. So having, I think it's 9 libraries open longer than before, it's the balance there, and it's not just money as a quantitative measure, it's also the value, it's the qualitative measure about the services we provide. And again, it's having to justify how we actually slice up our revenue amongst the services. Because at the end of the day, I think most of us have a real sense of civic pride in Bracknell now. And if I can quote somebody, whoever it said, it's a great place to live, work and play. The pressures are getting worse. It's known and understood nationally that the cost of social care is growing all the time. And our prime objective is to support everyone, but especially vulnerable people, particularly elderly and particularly children. And about 70% of our spend goes on supporting our residents. It's that big of a proportion. The transformation programme is still running under the name of the Business Change Programme, and that's been very successful in the non-care areas, especially in environment, asset and financial management, and leisure, which means that we're focusing more and more on social care and where can we actually make some meaningful savings, but not make sure that we actually provide a level of service that is going to not keep people happy, is to keep more and more people safe because of the pressures they're under. On top of everything else, I can't quantify the impact of Brexit, so we'll leave that on one side before we all fall out over it. But the global shifts in population, which is one of the reasons for all the news and discussion around immigration, that is putting a lot of pressure. Poor old Kent, they're having, because they're actually right at the front line of a lot of the immigrants. And so, we're expected to share the pressures that they have. And then, quite unexpectedly, first of all, we had the pandemic, and it's a shock still being felt around everywhere. The impact that that's had on finances, the support that I have to congratulate Rishi Sunak in terms of how he actually grasped it 3 years ago and tried to protect people in what were really unknown circumstances. Then Russia invades Ukraine, just another small thing, and the sheer cost of supporting Ukraine is quite significant in terms, because it's all coming out of the public purse. And then the impact on services, on food, materials, for example, cement, cereal, steel, has had a huge impact on construction when you think that one of our key projects is the joint venture. And beside that, it's had such an effect on the marketplace and security, so we've got levels of inflation that we haven't had for years. We've got, especially from today, we've got levels of bank interest, which I don't know how long it is since we've had interest where it is now. It's probably at least 10 years since it was this high. So trying to cheer you up. It still hasn't finished because of inflation. Originally, that we were planning on, one of our major items of expenditure is on salaries and staff. We were budgeting for 2%. I think, as everybody knows, it's just been agreed at 4%, but there are variances, so I think it's probably going to be around about 5%, which in terms of money is the best part of an additional £2 million, isn't it, Stuart? And then, when all said and done, it's not just money, it's actually our residents, the cost of living, the vulnerabilities, how we support them, how we fund that support. And the government were going to change adult social care. It's interesting, today it's actually the Children and Adults Annual Conference, isn't it? And James Jameson, who's the chairman of the Local Government Association, has made an appeal to government to actually put back some of these changes because of the sheer unaffordability of it. So it's a bleak picture of nearly done. So not surprisingly, more authorities are beginning to fail and will fail. We've got plenty of evidence quite locally on that. I have to say, Stuart and his team have been brilliant financial custodians, so we are safer than most people. I don't want to tempt fate here. But the issues that are confronting us are really significant in society. And as a local authority and our responsibilities, the pressures are enormous, and Stuart will actually explain how he's approaching that from the point of financial management. At the end of the day, it's not just about finance, it's how we actually fund our services. So forgive me if I've depressed you. I'm not sure whether Stuart can pull anything out of the bag to make you happy again.
Stuart, unless there's any questions at this moment to Peter at all on his words, Councillor Templeton.
I would like to make a comment that of all the summary of what he said was why we were in trouble. You forgot to say the mishandling of the budget and the finances by the government. But that's my...
Right, but the adults are in charge now, Mary. But point taken.
Stuart, perhaps over to you, and we'll take questions at the end, yeah?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try not to depress people anymore. It's not been the most energetic start to the meeting, but it is a reflection of where we are, unfortunately. So we're currently in the process of preparing the draft budget proposals, which need to be published at the December executive for the consultation period before the final budget is set in February. There's a number of different issues, factors that we need to take into consideration as we're preparing those budget proposals. The first is the current year's position. Where we are now is often a determinant of where we're likely to be next year financially. So members will see from the report that was presented to the executive in October, which is in the pack, that we were at that period predicting a potential overspend of up to around £1.1 million.
Stuart, can I just interrupt, and can you move your microphone a little bit closer to you? One or two are having difficulty
I'll try
hearing.
not to break it. So at the time the report for the October executive was produced, we were predicting an overspend of potentially up to around £1.1 million. And that includes drawing down £1.5 million from our inflation reserve to help meet the cost of the pay award. As Councillor Hayden has explained, it has come on higher than we budgeted for, in the same way it's been that position for every other local authority. Since then, unfortunate to say that the position has improved a little bit, so we're not quite on the same precipice that we were at the time this report is there, but we're still overspending our budget were it not for that inflation reserve. So therefore, for the first time in many, many years in Bracknell Forest, we are not able to contain spend within the original approved budget. That's very, very unusual. It gives an indication of the pressures that we were under. Looking ahead to next year, there's a number of different things that we take into account. The starting point is government policy. The changes that they introduce often have an impact on us. Councillor Hayden has talked about the adult social care reforms, which may or may not be introduced next year. If they are introduced next year, it will be with significant trepidation for anyone financially, because they are set to add significantly to costs. So I think we're all hoping for a little bit of breathing space but by delaying that, but it has not yet been confirmed. The other big policy issue for central government is levelling up, which was a key element of the 2019 election manifesto, two prime ministers ago, obviously, but I think we're now back into following that manifesto, so we might find out at some point in the near future what levelling up actually means. I think it's widely acknowledged that Michael Gove is probably one of the best Secretary of States around getting on top of his portfolio, so we hope genuinely that we'll get some clarity around that. As Councillor Hayden said, clarity to us is key. Understanding where we're going in the future is really, really important. So beyond the government policy announcements, obviously we get into public finances. And I was hoping this evening to be able to give you an update on the kind of headlines around that, because there was supposed to be a financial statement on the 31st of October. It has been delayed, as Councillor Hayden said, to the 17th of November. That will set the high-level framework for how much funding is likely to be available for public services next year. So that's going to be a helpful piece of input into our final budget deliberations and calculations. It will not give us the full answer for Brecon Forest Council, because we only get that when we get to the local government finance settlement, which we hope will be published before Christmas this year. But I have to say the time is looking really, really tight this year, so I'm not 100% certain that will be the case, but it always has been before, so let's hope so. Within that, they will set the amount of funding for individual local authorities. It's unlikely, I think, that they will introduce major changes to methodologies through the Fair Funding Review or business rates retention systems, simply because we're now in November and they haven't consulted on any changes. Typically they do consult before they introduce anything significant, so I'm hoping at this point that they're not going to make any major changes to the methodology. There are some specific grants which they could choose to tinker with and change, such as New Homes Bonus and the Services Grant, which was a grant introduced in the current financial year, so there's still scope for change, but our starting point assumption, as you'll see from the paper, is that we get broadly the same level of grant next year as we have in the current year, so that's an assumption. We will find out whether that's true or not in the month or so ahead. Another key factor in the budget equation is council tax. That's the one significant locally determined source of income which we have available to us. The previous settlement announced an indication that we would get the ability to increase council tax by 2% generally and 1% for adult social care precept. Whether that will be changed by the autumn statement announcement is not clear. My sense is it may well be, because government needs to balance the books somehow, and council tax is often a mechanism that they do choose, which actually helps them put the pressure, the decision onto local government, which is often a tactic which central government find attractive. So with all of those assumptions in place, we head into this position where we will have a big gap over the next few years. We expect it to have a big gap over the next few years, and we have our reserves in place which will help us manage a transition towards that more sustainable position over time. That's why we have the reserves. The paper indicates a potential gap over 3 years of £16.4 million. It will not be exactly £16.4 million. It will be higher than that or it will be lower than that, but that's the best case mid-estimate which we can point to at this moment in time with the information that we have at this moment in time. So obviously a challenging position going ahead. We will need to do what we can to maintain services, as Councillor Hayden said. That's what it's all about. The money is the mechanism that we use to deliver the services. The services are the important element, not the money. So on that note, Chairman, I think it's possibly time to ask if there are any questions.
Members, questions? Oh,
yeah, Councillor Bidwell. Thank you, Stuart. That was very eloquent. What is the effect? We all know that interest rates are going up very quickly. What is the effect, if any, on our reserves? And if there is an effect, can that unforeseen windfall be used to set aside some of our residents over the coming months who are going to be suffering significantly?
Because we're not in a borrowing position at the moment, then it's slightly favourable to us having higher interest rates. However, the impact of that on our budget is already included in this year's monitoring, so it's helping manage the position to one where we are close to balancing rather than significantly overspent. If we didn't have that additional money from the investments that we're able to make, then we'd be in a worse position, so it's already helping out.
Oh, right. I'm talking to these papers, is that right? First of all, I wish that we'd have had a little bit more money so we could have had coloured papers, because it would have meant I could then see what it was all about. However, page 26. Am I right in saying that we're not filling vacancies in departments, lots of departments? If there are vacancies, they're not being filled in order to save the budgets?
We don't currently have a moratorium on filling posts. What we're asking managers to do is to think very carefully whether there are alternative ways of managing the workloads of any vacant post at this moment in time. But if that can't happen, then we are saying to managers, you can recruit.
Okay, thank you. And then can I carry on? Because I've got quite a lot, yeah? Or I shall. Anyway, page 27, at the end, it said Treasury. It said reduction in supplies and services budgets following a review of services provided by external advisors. So did the council commission out to someone to say what cuts should be made, please?
Not cuts. We have for many years engaged, as most councils do, external Treasury advisors who give a sense of if you have borrowing and investment requirements, what would they recommend as the most appropriate places to go for those, because it is a technical market. We do get general advice. What this saving was doing was to pare it back so that we got less advice. So it's we only get input from them once a quarter now rather than more regularly.
Right, thank you. Page 30, it says pressure relating to unbudgeted ICT project costs. Is that just ICT, or is there other things? I mean, it's unusual ever to read in any of your papers unbudgeted costs, so I have picked them up.
Yeah, it does purely relate to ICT. We've been going through a process of migrating the council service on which our IT systems are held into a cloud-based approach rather than they used to be in the basement down here. There was a budget set up to manage the cost impact of that migration. It's revenue rather than capital because we're not buying the servers anymore. The money for that ran out at the end of the last financial year, but the work had not finished, so therefore there's more to be done, and we don't have a budget in this current financial year, so it's part of the overall position.
Okay, and I'll just ask two more now, and then that's it on page 36, and I'll withhold for a minute. On Heathlands, now Heathlands is in special measures. It's being, there are people in there. Are we still putting people into Heathlands, and if when it's red flagged? And if we're not, does that affect the budget here?
The first part, that's not a financial question, but I'm familiar with Heathlands, having been involved closely in it. No, while the service is red flag, we will not put any more residents in. No, absolutely not.
So if we don't put any residents in, do we not get any income from it then?
It's not so much income, it just means that we're spending more money on alternative placements. Because the point of Heathlands was that the market rate for placing people in there is a lot lower than the alternative elsewhere.
Yeah, understand. So it does have a financial
It has have a
implication.
financial impact, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And and on that page, there's income from schools. Now, we have increased academisation within Bracknell Forest. We've now only got one secondary school that is not an academy, and several primary schools are now turning to academisation. So does this income, is it sort of at risk?
Yes, and it will be a factor of the next year's budget.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope you'll allow me to have a little preamble before I do get to a question, which I do have. It's a perfect storm, effectively, that we've got high demand for local government services combined with austerity, and that, I suspect, would happen whatever the political hue of the government was, given where we are. With higher interest rates, we've heard about the pay award, pensions, contribution costs, inflation, energy costs, and the general cost of living. We need to maintain our reserves, I believe, over the longer term, because we don't know what the government's going to do, and I suspect government financing of local government is going to be very difficult for the foreseeable future. And I'm glad to see that we've got our reserves and we're being very prudent, because of course you can only spend those reserves once, and when they've gone, they've gone, and trying to build up reserves again in the current financial climate would be very, very difficult. So we're going to have to take some very difficult decisions this budget process and the following budget processes. And I'd like us to do all we possibly can to engage with our residents to make sure they take part in that budget process. I know we have a consultation, but I'm not sure how many people actually understand the budget process, and I think we need to look at alternative ways and innovative ways to engage with residents to help us come to informed decisions about the sort of services that we provide locally and how we pay for them. So I think that's going to be very much more important, because this is a journey we're taking with our residents through very difficult financial waters, and they need to be part of that process. But I think the key thing is setting aside this sort of short-term issue. The longer-term issue, which Councillor Hayden touched on, is the whole subject of local government finance. Now, we, I think, dealt with the pandemic on a local level really rather well. Not many local authorities did so too, but some didn't. And I think that just underscores to me that the best people to make decisions about local government finance in Bracknell Forest are the Bracknell Forest councillors and the Bracknell Forest officers. So that I'm coming to the question, which is, Councillor Hayden, do you agree with me that one thing we should be doing over and above maintaining a prudent budget with prudent reserves is doing all we can to work with other local authorities to urge them to change the system of local government finance, which allows control of local government finance to be in the hands of local councils, because I see absolutely no merit at all in the government arbitrarily deciding this is how we're going to carve up the cake. We talk about levelling up, which suggests there is an imbalance between north and south, which to some degree there is. But we have areas of deprivation in the south of England, and we have areas of deprivation in Bracknell Forest as well. So we can't assume that just because we're in the south of England, we're a wealthy corner of the world. So how should we convey to local government the seriousness of changing the model of local government finance so that actually the best people to take decisions about the money that we spend locally is us?
I can't disagree with anything you say. It's interesting in terms of deprivation that I often act on behalf of the leader on the South East Councils. And one of the pressure points coming from there is our coastal communities are notoriously, they do have quite severe problems. So we're not the wealthy South East everywhere, which just makes it's sort of King Solomon's judgment, isn't it? In terms of, I think it's probably cross-party. Certainly, James Jameson, as the chairman of the LGA, he's spoken publicly at a major event today about it. And the LGA as a body are actually directly appealing to the government, particularly to put off their proposed changes in social care. We all have a chance to lobby. I know the leader is has got a strong presence in the unitary authorities. And there is that pressure, but we've also got to pressure our MPs as well, that we just can't keep on as we are. They have got to do something. I agree with you completely. We do need more control as well, because we know our boroughs better than Whitehall does. So I'm completely in agreement with you, Robert. And we all, the leaders like Jameson are doing their bit, but all elected members have all got their, if you like, lobbying powers, irrespective of political party. And my understanding is that the LGA are lobbying on a cross-party purpose, because it's very serious. It's a national, local issue, and I think a lot of this actually goes to party politics. It's because people are suffering. The government are giving us a lot of money, but they're not giving us control of our own destiny. And that is what we really need. And yes, we all have to lobby for it.
Only to say, and perhaps it's unkind comment, but actually, I'm not sure how prepared the government is to listen, given that they don't even mention local government in the government department that deals with local government.
We have some fairly important Conservative ministers very close to us, and we've just got to go and doorstep them. I agree with you. I can't believe that they've taken our name out of the department's title. And Michael Gove's not very far away, and whatever you think about him, he actually has a reputation for getting things done. And he's only just on the other side of the county border, isn't he?
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I have got a few questions. So I'm sorry, Stuart. I've got through it quite a lot. So just on page 20, if I can, obviously I've been looking at SEND, and I just wanted to ask you, the education psychology of 114, is that one person or two people? What staff? Because obviously the devolved staffing budget has taken a hit in this area because we've had to spend more to enhance our services in this area. But I just wanted to get a real sort of feel of what it was.
I'm hesitant to put an exact number, the number of education psychologists, because I don't know exactly it, but it's fewer than 10, but I don't know the exact number.
Okay. And the SEND is also staff from the devolved budget as well?
There are a range of pressures in SEND, including staff, yes, absolutely.
You can have a look over my shoulder
Sorry,
if you
I'm
like.
Woody, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Page 28. I was really interested in this. Obviously, it's a savings. The new transport model. I just didn't know whether you could tell me about that. Highways and transport. Savings.
Yes, not in detail, but the Highways and Transport team do have a very clever bit of software which they have to use to assess the traffic impact of planning applications, etc. So what they have identified as an opportunity to give access to that, not physical access, but to offer to run scenarios on behalf of developers using that software, and they charge money for doing that. So it's a good opportunity to make the most of the assets that we have.
Oh, I see. So that the infrastructure then for new developments is better because they use this. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and it's a helpful income generator for us.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind taking an action there, we can ask Councillor Turrell and Andrew Hunter to actually just do a quick answer to you, because it's very much their field.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, I was just interested. Actually, page 36, I was going to ask about reduced management at Child Development Centre. A post is deleted. I'm very keen on, as you know, children's services. I just want to make sure that when we reduce posts like this, that we don't actually do it to make sure, can that go back please to the department, make sure that is really going to work, because we're very proud of our early years and our child development, and it just worries me when I see a post deleted.
The page that you see in front of you here, that's savings which were all identified and approved as part of the 22-23 budget setting process, so the impact of that would have been assessed before the saving was actually put forward. So the RAG ratings you see here are delivery of the savings rather than the impact of them.
Normally, we have a little bit on the side explaining it. We've had in the past explaining some of these.
During the budget setting process, absolutely, that's right. So that this is purely tracking the delivery of the savings that have already been agreed.
Yeah, I just saying that there is a note under surplus budgets in the left-hand column, because this is based on prior year outturns. There are recurrent underspends in the budget that have been set, so it's been reduced. So there is an explanation there. But whether that's enough for you, Jill's another matter.
It just worries me when I see something like that. I think, you know, I would like an explanation, so perhaps that can be noted so that when we have the full budget that we could see.
Oh, this is the in-year monitoring. So all that this page is doing is setting out all the savings that were agreed as part of the 22-23 budget setting process. And the papers for those with the full explanations were provided as part of the budget setting process.
Oh, so this is
only
in
tracking.
year. So this
is
in
only
year.
tracking delivery of the savings that have already been agreed.
Oh, so that's in year. Okay. I also was interested in service level agreements with our schools. I think it's worth making sure that we track this to make sure that service doesn't become non-viable because of lack of people actually subscribing to it. And I think that is a key thing. That's my only comment on that. I was just worried with people opting out of it that it becomes non-viable and not, you know, we run it at a loss.
Yes, those are the two risks, either it's non-viable or it becomes loss-making. As I said previously, there will be some pressures in the budget next year around that because we have had an increasing number of academy conversions over the last year.
My next page is page 39, which is about schools too, the schools budget. I worry about some of the schools with a deficit budget, and I think that's really something because schools have been really pressurised, and I think that's something that, I mean, it's not here and it's not applicable here. There's no way of recording it, but I think that is one of the things I'd like to say, that I feel very strongly that that's something that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there are fairly regular reports go to the schools forum with detailed information on all school budgets, and that does track the level of reserves which schools hold it every year. So yes, it is closely looked at.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just making sure that I'm not. The high needs block. I mean, it's very good that you. That's page 46. I like the fact that you do the best case and the worst case, and I think that is one of the real pressures. Is the high needs block, and I think it's really right that you've actually highlighted that, and I thank you for that and giving us proper figures, because you know, the worst case is 904,000. And it's really important that we know that the best case is 489,000, and I think it is a real pressure. So thank you for that. I'm not going to ask all these questions because some of these things are just for me to note. You know, as you go through, you sort of know, oh, let's have a look at that. I think I'm very pleased with some of the special needs, the way that you've highlighted it and you've actually written out very clearly exactly what's done. There's just one question at the end I'm going to ask. Right, page 112. And I was really interested in agency workers and oh, this is your thing, isn't it? It's the next thing, isn't it? Yeah, we are. Yeah. Sorry, that's me. Me getting carried away. It's Ian Leeks, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. A couple of easy ones, I guess. If there are any easy ones here, Stuart. Paul mentioned this earlier, inflation. Am I right in saying when I went through this, you've got in the budget about 7.58% on inflation, but we hear that this will be 10.1 and more from the news tonight. I just wonder how you feel about that one.
We have in our working assumption for next year's inflation provision of 7.5% allowance for pay, prices and income. You know, that's the current working assumption. Members will need to take a view on the fact, as you said, that inflation is currently 10.1% at this moment in time. Whether we can afford to add more to our inflation provision is a question. It needs to be seen in the context of all the other budget proposals, but it is an absolutely significant pressure that we're facing as all councils here.
Okay.
In fact, everyone in society at the moment
Can
is
I
facing.
also bring up, I think on the news tonight, local authorities are facing a huge problem over the cost of energy in their sports centres, and presumably we will face the same problem. And I think where this happened before, the outsourced company will come back and say, if you want this open, we need £500,000. How do you feel about that one?
I'm not going to speculate on any particular figures or anything like that, but yeah, clearly energy costs are a pressure. However, we do have a situation where the energy manager who sits in the property team under Kevin, he participates in a national framework which tends to forward purchase the energy. So to the extent that while the government has introduced a protection for businesses, including local authorities over the winter for energy costs, the prices we're paying are actually too low to qualify for that, which gives an indication of how well he's done in terms of that forward purchasing arrangement. And the leisure provider, I think, buys into that arrangement.
Okay, so there will be a pressure there. My last one is transformation, Stuart. And I suppose my first question is, why do we still have it? Because it's not a service department. In other words, it's not going to affect any resident if we didn't have it. And why can't we let the directorates do the transformation? Thus saving a lot of money, because I think there's something like £8 million that's been spent over a period of time. It's quite a lot of money to people.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you get that figure from, Councillor Burgos. I'm not going to comment on
I
that
think
figure.
I just to clarify this, I think it came from the July, from the briefing to the July to the executive, which I've got the figures here for you.
In terms of transformation, if we don't transform services, then the whole population will feel it, because it will mean that our costs keep increasing year on year on year. So there's a balance that we have to strike between how much we invest in supporting the service areas to transform the services at the same time as they are delivering the current services, because it's really, really difficult to do both at the same time without additional support. And that's a regular balance, and next year's budget will face some of the choices around that. So how much will we get in return for the investment through transformation? But it's something that our new Chief Executive may wish to come in and take a view on.
If I may. If I may, sorry. I maybe would use different language. I wouldn't describe it as transformation. I would describe it as continuous improvement. And I think it's important to have that continuous improvement across all services, so that you know you're delivering best value to the residents, and that you are operating as best as you possibly can within the context in which you're working. So we always have to be responsive to new legislation that's coming out, or new statutory requirements. So standing still is not an option. So I think looking forwards, particularly within the longer term budget envelope in which we're going to have to operate, that need for continuous improvement, or transformation, if you want to call it, will be paramount.
If I may just jump in on that, Mr. Chairman. The point I'm trying to make, Susan, is that I can understand the transformation when we wanted to streamline departments and take them from 4 to 3. I understand that, because that needs a lot of work and time. But if we're trying to save money and the residents need some value for this, surely that's up to the individual directorate to come up with that. So if it was adult services, it should be for that director to say, I think we could streamline this service. I don't quite understand, to be honest, why we have a separate stream of money, which is quite a lot of money, to look at something where they're not directly involved in it.
So my understanding is that all the directors are involved, and we do manage it through the corporate management team, because it's a corporate response to ensure that we're consistent across the organisation in how we're delivering that transformation, so that all the directorates are operating consistently. So I see it as a corporate function that we're then delivering across all of the directorates, and there is that buy-in. And that there's buy-in across from directorate level through to service delivery. we need to ensure that we're targeting the specific work streams or service areas that need that transformational service improvement the most, and we will prioritise that corporately.
And if I may just add also, Chairman, a conversation that we regularly have at corporate management team around that is the challenge to the individual executive directors. What can you see within your service area that you can change that will deliver better responses for the public, for residents, and will save money over time? And what support do you need from the corporate organisation in order to deliver that? So that second bit is where the transformation team approach comes in. It's the support to directors to deliver the change that they can see that they wouldn't be able to do without some additional support.
Thanks. We've always had a bit of a problem with the word transformation because it means different things to different people. It's actually it's gone out of use now, and it's referred to as business change. But the basic thing is still the same. It's an iterative and ongoing thing. So you mentioned the cost of the transformation programme. It's running to about £3 million a year, if I'm right, isn't it? But when you think that one of the early transformation, it's not just about cost savings, it's also about revenue generation. We exceed that alone on what we've every year on what we've achieved in the commercial property portfolio, which was part of the programme. Again, there's been a major change in terms of both cost and revenue savings in leisure by outsourcing. Now, they were all the early transformation programmes, but the really difficult one, which we are really having to work hard to crack, is around social care. And there actually is a number of projects within the programme running across both adults and children, and that's everything from commissioning, SEND is part of that. It's ongoing, trying to change the way we do things, and sometimes it is to generate revenue, but in terms of social care, it tends to be to do things differently. So it's not cost saving on its own, it's trying to do things differently. And the easy one for me is the way that we've used technology again in libraries. It's easy to understand, but it's having the digital, I hesitate to use the word journey, but that has a major impact, both in terms of saving money. You know, when you think this typical transaction, if you do it online, is about 10p. If you do it by face-to-face contact, it's about £20. Those are the sort of savings. And trying to do it differently by applying technology, and what it often does, it actually enables, by taking the routine out, by people being able to satisfy themselves when they want online, it also helps the level of service because the officers are able to focus on the more complex cases, which gives us a better response and also makes the officer's job more interesting as well. It is ongoing.
You can understand why I question it, though.
Oh,
because,
yes, because
it is a lot of money, and I don't think we've scrutinised that amount of money in the overview and scrutiny. I don't think we've even been there. Well, so I think that's something, Mr. Chairman, I think we should do.
I remember we had this conversation last year, didn't we, Tony? And saying, follow the money, follow the money, and the money is in social care, and I suspect it will come up again on the other agenda item because of the cost, the professional costs, and the individual skills that are necessary. And it is a really tough nut to crack, but more and more focus is going on that because that is where we still have to transform ourselves, both in terms of the quality and type of service. It's not just a money thing.
Could I just have one more quick one, then I'll hand it on. Just talking about social care, I noticed that I'm trying to look at my notes, but there's a business manager, I think, that Stuart, you listed in your report. I think it's 521, 522, 527, of which we are going to spend something like, have I got this right, £200,000. Is that right? For a year's contract?
We would not spend £200,000 for a year's contract, Councillor Virgo. Do you have the paragraph number that you can
I
refer
think
to?
it was, as far as I remember, it was 521, 522, 527. My question really is, have we not got the skill inside the council to monitor that business? I mean, just page 53, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
50, the business manager Bracknell Grade F on a fixed one-year contract. Bracknell Grade F pays someone around £40,000. So it's nowhere near 200,000.
But why can't we involve that in our existing infrastructure?
Because this is about bringing in additional capacity to actually support the service, which is trying to recover from a particularly difficult inspection. So there's deliberate investment and improvement, but it is a lot lower than £200,000 a year post.
Okay. I'll move it on.
Okay. You can come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that. A couple of questions, maybe for Peter and then one for Stuart. I couldn't find it in the agenda, but maybe it's buried somewhere in the figures. Looking at, you yourself, Peter, did touch on the commercial property portfolio. Is that something that is generating the revenue that we're looking for? And the second question is that would there be a situation where we might actually dispose of one of the assets in order to realise some capital back into the funds?
Right, first off, we have actually overachieved our targets on that, haven't we, Stuart? And that's been running for about 4 years now. And we're approaching something like £4 million completely net of everything, extra revenue, which is then going back into the general reserve. We never intended to keep the properties forever and ever, but they are doing what we expected them to do. They're all around businesses that nothing's recession-proof or inflation-proof, but they're all the right sort of businesses that are stable, performing, parts of blue chips. The risk template that we took is actually proved to be a godsend, and thank you, Stuart. That was your template, wasn't it? But we're not going to keep them forever and ever. And at some point in the future, the properties are also valued on a regular basis. And despite the fluctuations in the marketplace, we actually have a valuation probably around about 10% in excess of what we paid for them. So we haven't got any capital losses. And if we sold, it would be a capital gain and would have to be treated as a capital item. But it's not forever and ever, but at least we've got that flexibility, and they are performing and doing what we were budgeted or tasked to do.
If I can just come in on that, then there certainly is a circumstance in which we might consider disposing of one or more of the properties, and that is if we have a significant need to spend capital monies. And clearly, as Councillor Bibble pointed out earlier, interest rates are currently very high, so therefore there could be a case where it would actually make more sense to dispose of one of those properties, even though they are generating a return, because it could cost us less than borrowing on the market for that capital investment. At this moment in time, we don't have a big capital scheme coming up, but that's definitely a scenario that could happen.
Stuart, can I add that the way that you arrange the financing, any interest that's going against these properties is actually at quite a low rate, isn't it? You looked ahead in your crystal ball.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yes, absolutely. But the reality is we haven't actually borrowed externally to fund them. So we didn't have to. We put a notional interest rate against them because that's prudent in terms of demonstrating that at some point we may need to borrow for them, but we haven't actually borrowed for them to date.
Then, Stuart, maybe if I can, a question of you. On page 43, on the right-hand side, the second bullet point, can we have an update maybe on Vodafone? Because it uses the word assumed. So I'm just wondering, will it carry on to the end of the financial year? And what is the prognosis with regard to it maybe carrying on beyond the end of next financial year, with reference to, I think it was page 54, 5.33 in terms of Vodafone? I just wondered what the future is.
I'm very happy to give an update, Councillor Brossard, once the public part of the meeting's finished, because Vodafone's office is a commercial organisation, so we shouldn't really be talking to them in public, but yeah, certainly can afterwards.
Councillor Leake next, then Councillor Gibson, who's online, and then Councillor Porter and Councillor McLean. No? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. For the last few years, Stuart, the council tax rises have been capped to around 3%. Do we have to wait until the settlement is announced by the government to establish whether that will remain the case for the next fiscal years?
The settlement sets out the parameters in which local decisions can be made. So the settlement sets out the maximum level that's permitted. Local authorities have discretion to go up to that level or not increase at all. That's a local decision, but the actual maximum cap is set in the settlement.
Thank you. The other comment I would make is that it really follows on from something that Councillor Virgo has said. I think that I think when it comes to the budget, I think I would be happy if we could have a range of options on the inflation level, because I think we're going to be, particularly in view of the pay settlement, I think we're going to be very fortunate if we can keep it at in or around the 7.5% area. And I'm just wondering whether or not, and again I accept we probably won't know until the settlement is announced, whether the contingency amounts, or indeed the amounts we're going to allocate to reserves, will need to be revised. And fine, I'd like your comment on that. And finally, I have a feeling that sometime in the last month or so, we've had a comment that our energy prices have been locked in until sometime March, April, May next year. If that is the case, does it actually affect the issue of the leisure centre, etc., particularly the swimming pool matters?
I'll let Kevin Gibson go in if I get this wrong, but my understanding is that we've currently purchased about just over 50% of the energy requirements for the next financial year. So there's still an element of risk, but we've got a lot of it locked in, so that's a fairly good place to be at this moment in time. Going back to your other questions about inflation, the finance team currently are working with service areas around if we were to apply the inflation indices for all the contracts that we have, what would be the inflation cost around that. We will then compare that against what is affordable, as you say, giving options around how much we actually should provide for. And in terms of the contingency next year, that, as you know, reflects the level of risk that we see in the final budget. So it will be a key and important thing to look at next year, but a bit early at this moment to give a view on what it'll look like.
Thank you. And finally, Chairman, if I could go back to the issue of, I'm not sure whether we're calling it transformation, continuous improvement or business management, but whatever it is, I think that, bearing in mind what Councillor Virgo again has said about the apparent costs in this, again, not for discussion now, but I think it would be incredibly useful if at this meeting or some other forum, we could actually have a paper, because I'd like actually to know what these continuous improvements are and how they've been measured in what departments, and what the KPIs are for the future or currently, and how long it's going to last. Because a sum of £2 million or so is a significant amount of money. And while I was aware that some effort was going on, I wasn't aware that it's actually costing us that much. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask what we're actually getting for it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's unreasonable. We can give some thought to how we bring something back. Just looking back to the business change, transformation, continuous change programme, whatever we want to call it. The council first embarked on one back in 2016, when we faced at that moment in time a pretty perilous financial situation around having set a budget which relied on a much higher level of reserves than was comfortable for the council at that time. So there was a target set in 2016-17 of delivering £11.6 million through a number of transformation programmes, and they were very clearly set out and monitored through transformation boards. I can't remember the exact governance, but members were involved in many of them, including East Hampstead Bank Conference Centre, the leisure facilities, etc., the commercial property investment strategy.
To help you, Stuart, you might remember I chaired most of them.
The gateway reviews,
yeah,
weren't they?
The gateway reviews, thank you. So that original target of 11.6 million was actually achieved in about 2019. And the important bit being that is continuous recurring savings. So therefore, every year since 2019, we have saved £11.6 million. Actually more than that, it rose to above £1 million. So if you just add up the last 3 years, that's £36 million, another 12 million next year, another 12 million the year after. And if Councillor Virgo's figure of £8 million is right, that's still not a bad return on investment, actually. Looking back, what we need to do is make sure that going ahead, we're clear about what the expected return on investment for the additional staff and expertise that we bring in to support business change or continuous improvement going ahead.
Just in terms of helping the Commission does see the Corporate Performance Overview Report, which is the sort of summary of the Council's performance, and you see that on a quarterly basis. So just in terms of answering the question in terms of when do you see the business change programme, that comes through in that report. So I might ask if the Chairman wants that the next time we bring the CPOR to the Commission, we can have a specific paper or additional paper just to highlight what the business change programme's doing.
Yeah, I think we would want some separate identity in that paper, because quite clearly it's not obvious to us in that sense. Okay. Next, if I'm Peter?
It's just a brief comment, Chair, that when we started the transformation programme in 2016, there was quite a firm expectation that the fair funding review would have been completed by 2019, wasn't it? And it's a bit like manana, tomorrow never comes. The unpredictability of the situation has been that what we thought was going to happen pretty definitely 3 years ago it's still a couple of years away probably. And so remember the context in which we were working at the time, but the transformation is actually still generating, and it's been successful, is that it's continuing to protect us from uncertainties, some of which we never predicted, we could never anticipate.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you very much for that, Chairman. Here I am in Manchester, actually attending the conference that was referred to by Councillor Hayward. Indeed, I listened to Councillor Jameson make his announcements. And the reason I introduce this before I ask my questions is that I have the strangest feeling of deja vu, because I last attended one of these 15 years ago, and basic themes are the government should give us more money. We're facing a financial crisis. It's the worst it's ever been. We have an ageing population. The government's introducing a new method of measuring and targeting what local government is doing. I heard these 15 years ago. I'm hearing it now. The assurance agenda hasn't been signed off by ministers, which is what a lot of the authorities are actually saying. Could we put this back? Because the main problem we've got at the moment is that the changes that are being introduced in adult social services haven't been fully costed. So we don't even know what we should be asking government for that, and that'll have an impact on whatever we do with the budget. In Bracknell, nationally, there's been a 21% increase in adults over the age of 65, which obviously has an impact on adult social services. It's a gigantic increase. But in Bracknell, we're nearly 10% above that at 32%. I just want assurance that we've been using our working assumptions that increase is actually more than our local comparators. My fox has been shot a little by Ian Leake with looking at the inflation rates, because inflation has been varying, and we've got one working assumption, but also we know that, say, for instance, in property and construction, there's been a 2% increase by month. That might affect some of the capital some of the projects that we've actually on running at the moment. So with those increases in adults, government legislation, the third one, inflation, are we looking at different rates rather than trying to combine them into one figure we're looking at?
Stuart, did you want to respond to that?
We do a line-by-line review of inflation in all services and against all types of spend, so it reflects the indices which apply to the individual contracts that we have in place. So that review is undertaken, that comes up with a number. We then need to compare that against what we can afford to put in the budget, but the work does happen at that level.
And the
Mike, did you have a supplementary?
It was just to say that answers the inflation question, but I was asking about also the increase in ageing population has been noted as well, as opposed to our surrounding comparative authorities.
Yeah, we allow every year in our budget for the actual number of adults in adult social care and children in children's social care at the point at which we set the budget, so it's always as up to date as it can be.
So that differential really doesn't matter because you're just looking at the numbers coming in. Thank you for that. That's my question.
Conscious I've spoken already, so I do have a question, but just an observation on the whole business of transformation. I've no objection at all to scrutinising the spend, but one of my objections has been local government operating in silos, and I think the only way to achieve real transformation is for this to be done centrally, working with individual directorates. We had a panel, a scrutiny panel last night, where we were talking about the blue badge review, and without preempting what Councillor Gibson's going to say about that later, you know, the fact is there's transformation going on there with customer services working with the directorate to streamline the process and make it easier for people to apply for blue badges. I think it's imperative that we look at this in a holistic way and not allow departments to come up with proposals themselves without the benefit of them looking at the impact of that across the whole council. But my question is quite straightforward, and to some degree I'm reassured, Stuart, by what you said about the energy costs of the leisure services we're provided with by everyone active. Does that also cover our schools? Because one of my real concerns is the impact on already very stretched school budgets, with some schools, you know, already running deficits and energy prices going up. Are they protected as part of this pricing?
I think the honest answer to that, councillor, is we don't know, but we can find it.
My understanding, Robert, is that the schools that are the responsibility of the LEA actually take part in the same energy arrangements as we do as a council. It is all inclusive. I can't say the same for the academies, unfortunately.
Mary?
Yeah, mine is, I know I've spoken before, but mine is great concern, as it says here, is that there is concerns regarding the size of the deficit forecast for the high needs block, which we know from last year, if I remember rightly, is about 23 million by 2023, something like that is coming in. And then it said that any accrued debt rests with the DFE and not local authorities until at least 31st of March 2023. Now that 2023 is coming quickly. And I know there are 2 proposed schools and things and everything to make this better, to make it, to meet this deficit and to stop it keep happening. But have we heard anything from the government to say that actually after March the 31st, 2023, that sort of deficit is the responsibility of the council?
Not yet, to Mrs. Templeton. The DLOC did do a survey of local authorities who were particularly affected by high needs blocks rising costs in the summer, and that has informed some further conversation they had with DFE. And I was at a session of the Society of Unity Treasurers 2-3 weeks ago. It was a day that the previous Chancellor was sacked nationally, so the DLOC officials got called away to do things nationally, but just before they went away, they indicated that there would be an announcement very soon that councils would, that would help relieve the immediate pressure on councils. We haven't yet had it, but I'm hopeful from that they're going to at least put it back a number of years, if not find a more permanent solution to it. So it's still a risk for 23-24 budget, but at this moment in time it feels as though there is an announcement coming soon that will take that away.
Some councils managed to get it completely removed.
Some councils have managed to have their historic deficits completely removed, absolutely, and written off. Now, we are part of something called a Delivering Better Value and Send programme, which is not part of that same arrangement. So what we're doing at the moment is working with consultancy firm Newton Europe and SITFA to look at the approach that we're taking to our high needs blocks placements. You know, what is the cost at the moment? What do we see for the next few years in terms of the changes in demand for some of those placements, and how can we manage those differently? And so they're helping us work through what our current plans were, advise us on are there any other things that we could be doing, essentially with a view to giving confidence to DFE that all local authorities in that programme are delivering as good value as possible in a situation where demand is increasing really significantly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Members, are there any other questions? I think we've given that a fairly good scrutiny. No other questions? Then can I thank the officers for their responses, Peter, for coming along and helping us understand that better, and it's been a useful session. Let's hope the 17th of November doesn't come up with a lot of surprises where you've got to change an awful lot. Okay, thank you for that. You're welcome to stay, but if you want to go, again, you're welcome. We're going to move on to item 7, where we've invited Councillor Leake as Chairman of the Employment Committee to address the Commission and provide a briefing on the Council's workforce management, including recruitment and retention strategies, and the use of consultants and particularly agency workers. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the invitation to what some might call a high-risk area. I'd just like to make a few opening comments, if I may. I've brought with me our Assistant Director for Human Resources, Paul Young, who will be talking to this in a moment or two, and Stuart McKellar has kindly provided some information in relation to consultants. I think it's important to recall or remember sort of the brief that the Employment Committee has got and is laid down in the Constitution, which perhaps isn't necessarily as wide as one would wish, but that's something that perhaps can be talked about later. The issue of the workforce management, including workers' retention and recruitment, has always been a difficult one in some areas, particularly for social care and children's services. And that's one of the reasons why I've asked Paul to come along and explain some of the technicalities and the difficulties involved. By way of background, we use as an umbrella, I'm going to call it an umbrella recruitment agency, and Paul will correct me and give the right terminology if I'm wrong. but we use an umbrella recruitment agency called Matrix, for which we try to source all the agency workers and some recruitment that we do. But in many cases that's not possible, for the simple reason that some workers can gain higher pay by not using that agency and coming to us and other authorities directly. And Paul will talk about that, the detail of that, in a moment or two. Secondly, the issue has arisen about the use and the cost of consultants. Members who've got long memories may remember that in 2017 the Commission looked at this matter in detail, and the papers are still there, either in modern.gov or certainly on the internet, to refresh your memories. It was that paper was an extensive and time-consuming piece of work, but I thought it gave us some useful pointers and lessons which we might discuss at the end of this presentation. And Stuart has kindly agreed to provide some high-level costs and information on that. And after Paul and Stuart have spoken, then obviously we're open to take your questions, but I think the chairman wisely perhaps has asked us to do both the presentations back to back and then take questions afterwards. So at that point, could I, Paul, ask you if you could take us and lead the members through the technical processes that we use in order to deal with the first part of the workforce management issue.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Leake. We have provided just a short summary report which gives an overview of some of the sort of challenges that we've had through the agency workers. And I just wanted to start off by identifying some of the issues to do with spend and the recruitment agency spend over the last 4 or 5 years or so. And that's actually identified at 2.1 on the report, and it's shown on the presentation in front of you. There are some concerns and challenges with making sure that we've got correct and accurate data for agency spend, partly due to the fact, as Councillor Leeks indicated, we have got this single vendor who operate the agency work through Matrix, but there's where the expectation for all of the service areas is that if there is a need for an agency worker, that need would be met by Matrix. I think the reality of that, because of some of the issues that Councillor Leek has just identified, is that isn't possible. And it's particularly prominent in social care, where individuals and individual agencies do not want to take part of this single matrix arrangement, because by doing that they have their costs capped. So they can actually get better returns by actually supplying the agency workers direct. That said, we are still working with that particular matrix to try and look at ensuring that there is more on-contract spend. Just looking at the spend over the years, as I say, because there is the challenges of how individual departments have actually budgeted, and also which cost centres the agency workers have gone through, we can't give a sort of 100% commitment that is exactly accurate. But what I would say is that there's been a lot of scrutiny on agency workers and agency spend for the last 9-12 months or so through CMT. And through that arrangement, clearly we've had some of the work that we've looked at as far as the social care arrangements are concerned. So what we're looking at certainly from this financial year, I think we're a lot more confident that the agency spend is going to be in a lot more accurate way, because we've actually put various safeguards in to make sure we can capture anybody that's used as an agency worker, either directly through Matrix or if they've been engaged directly from a separate agency. Okay, just this is a top level indication for this current financial year, of spend by department, and it won't be a surprise for any of you to see that the biggest department is with the people department. Currently we have 93 agency workers in place across the council, and which represents here that a 72% spend within the people department. And we have clearly, through the work through a project that's been undertaken for the last 9 months or so, looked at ways to try to address that with a review of the terms and conditions and paying conditions for social care, of which has recently gone through Employment Committee. I would say we had a great deal of challenge through that from Employment Committee, rightly so, given some of the challenges, the financial challenges across the organisation. But with this, the scrutiny now, as I say, through the CMT, of which we provide a quarterly update to CMT about agency workers, and also into the level of detail about what the exit arrangements are for the agency workers. So we've got a clear indication that we want to stabilise the workforce with permanency. And I think it's important to mention that we're always going to need a degree of agency staff, and there will always be the requirement to engage somebody through an agency that we haven't got the skills in the organisation to provide, and we just can't capture somebody at a certain level. And we want to move away from the fact that agency will continue to provide a useful source of worker for the council. But what we're trying to do, and typically with the work that we've done with that particular project, was to have a more stability in the workforce. And that is critical, clearly, in areas of social care to make sure we can actually deliver to our communities. Going back to the agency arrangement, I think it's just important to recognise some of the benefits that we have through this, and where the contract is in place. We have got agreed rates of pay for each job role across the council, and critically, one point of contact for any temporary worker requirement, and that in itself is actually being a good source of speeding up the process to engage agency workers, whereas previously, a number of years ago before this arrangement, a manager would have to go through a number of agencies to get the workers. So in a sense, the principles of this actually should be providing a lot more efficiency for our managers. With this, we've also got the commitment to the safeguarding requirements, which clearly for the arrangements and the workers that we're engaging with is important. And the bottom bullet point there is something which we've engaged through this particular contract, and that is something that we have benefited from. And a number of you that will be aware of how agencies operate, then typically you could be paying up to 15-20% for a temp to perm arrangement. Through the matrix agreement, if someone's actually in post for 12 weeks, then we take that person on as a permanent employee. There are no agency fees to rely on. The challenges, I think we've talked about that, about the off-contract spend. We do meet fairly regularly with Matrix to try to deliver increased on-contract spend, but I think the challenges are there we can see it, and as long as there is a situation where social work agencies can provide individuals themselves and move away from this particular contractual arrangement, I think that's going to be a challenge to actually increase the on-contract spend. But that isn't to say that we are still working with Matrix to see if we can increase that. The temp to perm charges, as I say, is something which we really do benefit from, and there have just in the last 6 months or so, we've had 3 individuals that have made the transition from temp to permanent staff. With the work from the Employment Committee of changing some of the paying conditions, we are very hopeful that that number will go up in social care. With the work that we did to do with that particular project, there is a recruitment and retention blueprint, of which I think that will be familiar with a lot of people. I think the most important bit of this was the gathering the data and the data analysis that we've actually undertaken as far as that exercise is concerned, to really actually understand what the problem was and to where the challenges were. And this is something which has been engaged in in social care. We will be looking at other areas of the council where we either have significant spend against the agency lines or where we really are struggling with our recruitment and retention arrangements. The exercise also engaged with the business, as you would expect us to do, and critically looked at all of the other areas, other neighbouring authorities to see what arrangements they had as far as their recruitment and retention arrangements were concerned across social care. And again, the blueprint here is something that we can pick up and deliver in other areas of the council where we have some significant issues. I think some of the recruitment and retention strategies that we have in place in Bracknell Forest, I've spoken before about the pay scheme and the career pathways for social care. I think when we discussed this around the employment committee, we concentrated almost entirely on the monetary value and the benefits of that particular package. What we didn't go into too much detail is in terms of the career pathways in social care, and that is something which from this particular project of work we are very hopeful will put us in a very good place to make sure that the staff that are coming to Bracknell Forest and we want to retain in Bracknell Forest have got really very clear expectations of what they can get and how they can be developed here in Bracknell Forest. Apprenticeship routes enhanced. This is something which is a key drive for ourselves into making sure that one, we're getting best value of the apprenticeship levy, but also looking at examples where we can have apprenticeship routes in these shortage areas. And we've recently had an arrangement with a university in the south of England, in Brighton, where we have engaged an apprenticeship scheme for AMPs. And many of you will be aware that that is a really challenging post to actually recruit to. So hopefully we'll be in a situation where we can actually have a number of apprenticeships through that route, and that will clearly identify some savings with the agency spend. The step up to social work programmes and the student social worker placements is something we've always done reasonably well here in Bracknell. And the step up programme is a programme that we operate on behalf of all the Berkshire authorities. I'd say it's been relatively successful here. What we have struggled with is that we have the individuals in post, we train them up, and then in the past they've been here for a short period of time, and then they go off to other areas where there are greater financial incentives. Clearly what we want to do is actually retain them in Bracknell Forest post that step up and that learning and development initial part of their careers. And I think the career pathways will hopefully assist with that. So common opportunities. We are looking at ways, certainly within adult social care, where we can engage further with health partners to see if there are opportunities to have sort of temporary secondment arrangements, and that's typically in some occupational therapy roles, and also in terms of some of the care roles in adult services as well. Careers events. Over the last year or so, we've done a number of programs with universities for some years now for teachers and going to universities to try and encourage teachers to come to Bracknell Forest. This is just, we're widening this out now, and these operations now, we go to a number of career events. We've been to a number at the Lexicon. Well, I've got to say, a lot of the feedback we're getting is actually there's a massive appetite out there for apprenticeship roles within Bracknell Forest Council. And that's what we're really trying to seek, to see if we can get some more routes and options into that. But we also are looking at, we have done a number of careers events in schools, and again, looking at ways people can get into the public sector environment. And again, I think there's probably more opportunities to be doing that fuller. But we've recently also been doing some events directly with the job centres as well. The levers processes, we've had quite a robust levers process within social care to really understand why people are leaving the organisation, and we're just widening that out now across the whole of the council, so we've got a more robust process to enable for some useful data to really understand why in particular areas why we don't retain people to the length and expectation. I've got to say the learning and development opportunities that we provide in Bracknell Forest are very good. Often we'll get feedback is that the catalogue we've got is well developed, but often the staff themselves can't have the time and they haven't got the capacity and their timing to actually go on and be developed. So that's one of the key areas for this recruitment of attention strategy, to make sure that those learning and development opportunities are realised and staff can actually get onto that.
Thank you, Paul. Ian, have you anything to add?
No, I was
before
just
I open
gonna
it
say-
up to questions.
Do you want to take questions now or when Stuart has spoken?
Let's have Stuart speak and then we'll take the questions.
Because Stuart will talk about consultants, and it's also mentioned agencies, but there's also obviously an overlap with that aspect with what Paul has said, and you will see that as Stuart goes through his short presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Lake. I will attempt to share my screen in a moment, but Joey, if you wouldn't mind being ready to be the glamorous assistant again if I need to call on you, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. So, as Councillor Lake just said in his introduction, there is actually a fairly large degree of overlap between agency workers and consultants. It's almost like if you can picture a Venn diagram, you have agency workers which typically are brought in to fill posts in our structure which are vacant for various reasons, and we can't afford to have them vacant for a period of time. Consultants tend to be brought in to deliver really specialist one-off pieces of work, but in the middle there is an awful lot of overlap between the two, so that's what we see. Now we do and always have engaged consultants, all local authorities do, because the reality is, particularly if you're a small unitary authority like Bracknell Forest Council, you cannot always justify employing enough or even a single really specialist worker with the scale of activities we've got. So that's just the reality that we face. So therefore we do fairly regularly bring in consultants to support and short pieces of work, then they go away, then we might bring them back again. Planning is an area where we do it, for example, around the viability assessments, which come in fairly frequently. We simply don't have the expertise or resource in-house to do that, so therefore we will bring in specialist consultants to look at those kind of things. So it's not uncommon that we do it. As Councillor Lake said, I did do a very detailed piece of analysis back in 2017. I'm glad he remembered it. I must admit I'd forgotten it. But that did take at the time quite a period of time to actually pull together, because as Paul had said, when we're looking at what's coded to our financial system, it relies on people choosing the right code to code it to. So therefore, a lot of things which sometimes are coded to consultants' costs as one of the detailed analysis codes, I wouldn't necessarily say they are consultants' costs, but someone has chosen to put them against it. So the exercise that I did a number of years ago was really to look in detail at everything that had been coded to consultants' costs in our ledger at that moment in time, and dig down into what was it for, was it really consultants, and that was the detailed information that I brought to ONS at the time. I haven't had the time to do that for this evening. What I have been able to do is just pull together very high level figures around what we spent on consultants by directorate over the last number of years. So that's what I will now attempt to share with you, if I can get it right. Ooh, exciting, it seems to have worked. Right, so as you can see, and what would probably be expected actually, I hope, is that we have spent a lot of money on consultants over the last number of years. It's typically around 4 million a year. There have been a couple of years where it's been a bit more. This year we may be on track to spend a bit less. The biggest area where we spend it is on capital schemes, because that is where you need to employ the really specialist engineers, cost consultants, etc., which we have put in place an arrangement with Atkins, a managing partner arrangement. That's been in place for many years, because we simply cannot employ some of those specialists in-house. They are not interested in coming to work for a local authority on our terms and conditions. So the review of the approach to that was undertaken only a couple of months ago, actually, because the contract with Atkins expires next June. So after looking at a number of options, a report was brought to the executive, and the strategic procurement plan, which was accepted, recommended having a similar arrangements once the one with Atkins finishes next June, for exactly the reasons that we simply cannot get those really specialist technical people in-house. We've got a few of them, but they're really hard to find, and therefore that's why we'll have a similar arrangements going ahead. So most of our spend of consultants will always relate to the capital schemes, because that's the big one-off specialist bits of work that we do. So that's the kind of headlines that we spend. If we look at the specifics, if I can manage to move it on, which I'm struggling to do because all I can see is myself. Right, bear with me. I might just have to come off the sharing for a sec. Move the presentation on. Then reshare. Okay, so we go. So the figures for on the previous slide were the totals for the last 5-6 financial years. This is the actual sums coded to consultants' fees for the past 12 months. So that's to the end of September 2022. These are the only consultants that we have paid more than £100,000 to over that period. The biggest is Atkins, as you'd expect, through the managing partnering arrangement. The second one, I think, is I nearly took it out, but then I thought it's a really good example of the coding issue, because Jeffrey Osborne Limited are the construction contractors who are building the Binfield Community Hub at this moment in time. So from my perspective, that's nothing to do with consultancy. That's a construction contract, but it's been coded for some bizarre reason to consultancy. So that gives an indication of the issues that we face in terms of being clear that what we look at here is consultancy really is. The next one does feel as though it is a proper consultancy, because we've got really specialist equipment which we get through PTS, the pavement testing services, for the footway surveys that we do. We no longer have people who walk around the borough looking at the state of the footways. It's all done through very clever technology, through the service they provide. And the third one, again, is another one, or sort of the final one, is another which we've got Everyone Active. Everyone Active are not consultants, but what they are doing is putting in place a new splash pad, which the council has agreed to fund at Coral Reef. The reason it's gone through them is because they run the facility, so therefore they are managing the spend, incurring it, but we are paying for it, so it's going through our books. So again, I would say that's not consultancy, that's actually buying equipment and installing equipment. But so they are the only 4 consultants, in inverted commas, that we have paid more than £100,000 to over the last year. So you can see, you compare that to the overall quantum, we engage a lot of small scale consultancies for small pieces of work. Okay, and that's all by me by way of introduction. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Stuart. Oh dear, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Questions, Councillor Vogel?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Susan, can I just ask you a question? In terms of what we've heard about staff and retention of staff, how do West Berkshire look at this? Is this a particular problem? Sorry,
So it's a problem across the board and I would say not just local authorities. Nationally, we know that there are shortages of staff across numerous types of industries and sectors. So this isn't unusual. And I think particularly for local authorities, there is a huge amount of strain and pressure. And there are a lot of authorities experiencing staff leaving, making life choices. And at this stage, and in this current economic climate, they're leaving to join agencies because the agencies are offering them or able to offer them more money. And that puts all local authorities, particularly those that are neighbouring authorities that might be competing up against each other, and that does make it very difficult. And the pond is becoming a puddle. And so our access to those resources is becoming more and more strained.
I know we've said this before, but and I know it's very difficult because Royal Borough want the same things and so on. But would it be a good idea if we could revisit this and try and get one kind of overall kind of bargaining thing for the councils around here, like Berkshire councils, rather than all fight for the next dollar to get somebody?
Yeah, there are conversations being had around how we can do that across different expertise and different service areas, so that we can offer, for example, Stuart mentioned attracting the right level of expertise around certain capital programs, for example. The reason why we can't always attract the right skill set is because when certain roles work within the private sector, they get that professional exposure to a whole ream of different projects that they can then develop their skill set that maybe one authority can't. Whereas actually if you can agree some sort of shared arrangement, then actually you can offer up those different experiences to that one individual, but across a broader area and a broader suite of projects.
Mm-hmm.
So conversations are in early days at the moment, but I think there are opportunities.
Paul.
Thank you. John.
Paul.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
So, just in respect for the agency workers, because I think your point is well made in terms of looking at joint arrangements, because we have in the past had joint arrangements for agency workers, of which across the South East there were plans in place, well, a memorandum of understanding that if people left or resigned from their permanent position to go to agency, that nobody within the South East would actually take them on for a period of time. That worked for a very short period of time until a number of the councils, maybe through inspection or through whatever, had some challenges in their area, and they soon deferred away from that agreement. There always talk about reinventing that, but I think the reality of it is, in terms of the establishing it, as though we've done it in my lifetime here, we've done it over on two occasions. And the second occasion, it didn't last beyond 6 months because of those challenges. And then as soon as one local authority defers away from that, then others follow suit.
Jill?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Can I just say I welcome this. Thank you very much for bringing it, because, as you know, I did an apprenticeship review, and I love the fact that you've got this here, saying OTs particularly, that we're going to develop it. And I remember from that review we had 55 apprenticeships across mainly social services. So do you have a target for occupational therapists for recruiting apprenticeships? Do you have any strategy there?
Yeah, if we're looking at the apprenticeship levy spend and also opportunities for the trainee OTs at the moment. We've with 4 OTs, with the review that we've recently undertaken within social care, we feel reasonably confident that a number of the agency staff that are currently with the organisation, we hope we can tempt them to become permanent workers with the new arrangements that we have in place. But certainly we are looking at a number of areas to do with apprenticeship opportunities. OTs are one of them, but as I said, critically we're looking at the highest spend at the moment, and where we've got significant spend and where there is challenges for recruitment, such as the AMPs. The one that we've actually got in place now with Brighton University, we're very positive about, because I think that will actually go some way. But the apprenticeship opportunities, that we're looking across the piece, and we're also actually engaging with schools as well, because while we're looking at agency staff and challenges within the council, the recruitment challenges in schools for support staff in schools is becoming more and more significant. And we're also looking at ways that we can actually enhance and support our schools to make sure that they've got the workforce that they need, as well as the internal council.
You don't currently have any OT apprenticeships at the moment, do you?
Not a scheme, but that's being looked into at the moment.
But you are developing a scheme.
We're developing a scheme, and we're also looking at trainee OTs, which will actually hopefully lead to an apprenticeship levy spend as well.
Can I ask if that's in children's OTs as well as adult?
That is children's.
It is children's, is it? Because that is where the gap is, isn't it?
It is. Well, we've only got one full-time equivalent post in for children's OT because they, at the moment, they obviously use external partners for OTs. But we are looking across the piece, both children and adults, for a number of the skill and professional areas. We're looking at every single opportunity to access apprenticeship levy funds. Some of the issues with this is looking at backfill, because where we've got apprenticeships in place with the requirement to do off-site activities as well and the learning, it does actually bring challenges. So some of the discussions we've had with this is what we do to offset some of the time that they're actually off-site with the apprenticeships. So we're looking at the wider scope of this, but certainly the professional roles across all of social care has been looked at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, 3 questions and 1 comment, if I may. Thank you. Just going on from what Councillor Mrs Birch has began about, 2.6 on page 112, your first bullet point, apprenticeships in social care and occupational therapy are being offered to existing staff members. Is that temporary staff members or actually current staff members?
It's both. We've got a number of agency workers within the OT field, within adults, that we're looking, that's not just the apprenticeship, that's actually trying to get them onto the permanent staff team. But apprenticeships, first and foremost, we're looking to develop our own workforce within that. But clearly, as I said earlier on, to do with the feedback that we're getting through the careers fairs, we are trying to make this as wide as possible to be looking at recruiting to apprenticeship roles. And we've recently been successful in doing that within the finance team, where we've recruited 2 apprenticeship roles because we struggled to recruit to the roles that for accountancy. 5. So it is an ongoing development, but some of this is still early days, but we are looking at really developing this now.
I understand that, Paul, but it says that you're going to be trying to offer it to existing staff members. So does that not then leave vacancies or gaps in other departments? So how are they going to be fulfilled?
I think it's looking at it's wider than just internal. We are looking at this, and we're looking at recruiting to for apprenticeship positions as well. Councillor Porter.
Okay, thank you. My second one is you're doing exit interviews. It says more robust leaver process and getting feedback from new starters after 3 and 6 months. Is part of that process actually finding out why those new employees chose Bracknell Forest, so we can actually enhance our recruitment processes, so we actually promote the benefits of working for Bracknell Forest?
Absolutely right. Yes, it is. That's feedback that we are getting now, both for 3 months, and also even just after interview. But what I would say, we're in a really challenging position. I think what Sue mentioned earlier on about the size of the pond. Just this week, we've actually had a situation where we've actually made a job offer to a professional role in social care, who was very keen to come to Bracknell Forest because of the situation we're in terms of the inspection outcome, in terms of the culture of the organisation, and indeed what other people have said about working in Bracknell Forest. The recruitment process effectively recruited this individual, and at the time of the accepting, or whether they would accept the offer, they refused because they wanted an extra £10,000. So it's not just looking at the scenario of people wanting to come to Bracknell Forest. We're in a really challenging position, and I think it's an employee market at the moment, and where we have to rely very heavily on the fact is that this place is Bracknell Forest is a good place to work. We are shortly going to be undertaking a full staff survey, which will give us clearly some indication about what it is like to be working here in Bracknell Forest, and we're also undertaking at the same time a wellbeing survey. But going back to your original question, yes, we do ask that question after 3 and 6 months. And critically, it's quite difficult to get accurate information at exit. And what we have done is, across social care, is actually offered one-to-one interviews for social workers leaving. That in itself doesn't provide an awful lot of information, because often they will just, and particularly with the exit to go to agency, it's clearly, well, we're just leaving here to go to agency. We love working here. And we often get that as feedback. and it's just the financial position that they're moving forward. But what we want to do is actually capture this electronically, and that's where we're a robust system where everybody that is leaving the organisation, we can capture the information and report back to the departmental management teams about why people are leaving the organisation and to pick up any issues and trends.
Chair, before I go into my third question, I have a supplementary on that one. So when you're doing the survey for the 3 and 6 months, is one of the questions actually, are we as a council providing those new employees what we promised them at the interview? And is that being delivered, and how is it being delivered? And if not, who is responsible for ensuring that that is delivered so that people are being given what they were promised?
That's a good point, because ultimately it's a managerial responsibility to be doing that. Up to now, we've not actively fed all that information back, and that's something that we're actually developing now. So we have got information back at 3 and 6 months. Previously, it's been down to managers to actually be assessing that within their own area, but it's something we are enhancing.
Okay, thank you. Very good to hear. And it is very hard out there, wherever department or business. I'm going to go on to the last bullet point on page 112, where you continue to operate the setup to social work programme on behalf of the Thames Valley Partnership. And you say it's very hard to actually keep those people at Bracknell Forest. Is there, or have we thought about, like golden handcuffs?
Yes, we have had retention payments in social care. We still remain to have social retention payments within children's social care. The new arrangements we have in place has enhanced the base salary, and through the initial data analysis that we did for this particular project, it was very clear that I think understandably people wanted a higher base salary, and previously we had for social workers and children's the base salary plus market premium plus a retention payment, which effectively is the golden handcuffs. But what we have done for this arrangement is actually just enhance the base salary, so that's a permanent increase in salary, and we still have that golden handcuff arrangement in place across some areas of children's social care. The arrangements we have in place, that should we need to reinvest that or review that, then there is flexibility within the system to look at that again. But what we want to do is see clear evidence, first of all, that we are struggling to retain individuals and clearly recruit individuals to enable that to happen. And those discussions take place through the Employment Committee.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And finally, Chair, if I may, we've been talking about consultancy costs and agency costs going through the roof. And it's very hard to recruit that particular person or expert in one unitary. We have the public partnership protection, which is working extremely well, which is a joint venture now between Bracknell Forest and West Berkshire. And it used to have Wokingham. Now, when Wokingham decided to leave the partnership, they've now purchased in a lot of the services that are provided by the public protection. So are we actually looking at other councils that one council hires that expert and then others buy into those services to actually fund it, and they actually could actually give a return on the services?
If I can just start with where we are, Councillor Port, we have many joint arrangements across Berkshire local authorities, some covering all 6, some covering a few of them, and you're absolutely right, they do provide the opportunity to employ a good cohort of the right number of staff, which you couldn't do individually. Public health's probably the most recent example, although we're looking again at how that's going to change. So yes, it's happening a lot, and I was at a session yesterday with my counterparts and the wider finance teams. First time we've met together for 5 years, but one of the key topics of conversation was how we can maximise the value of our kind of collective leverage, if you like, by looking at joint arrangements for agency workers, working across each other, sharing staff, offering opportunities for people to be seconded. So yeah, all those conversations are happening, but it's building on a fairly strong arrangement that's been in place actually since 1998.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Can I just follow from John's point to Paul, or maybe Stuart, I don't know. The BBC had this wonderful system of attachments. That's how I gone on, really. And it gave staff within an organisation, if they did, say, want to get into planning, for instance, and they're in adult services, you could apply for that and you know, you do a 6-month attachment. Now, this might be too small an organisation, but it gave staff kind of other incentives for career divergence or whatever. Have we thought kind of wide of that circle and, you know, try to involve staff in a more interesting kind of schemes?
We haven't had anything formal like that, but what I would say during the COVID period, we had some interesting opportunities to see what other skills staff had, because we at one stage where we were looking at the potential for redeploying temporarily people and staff to other areas of the council which were having significant pressures during the COVID period. We found out all sorts of information about what skills and previous professional standings individuals within the staff team had. So that's something, again, we could look at.
It just gives people... Just one other observation, Mr Chairman, sorry. I tried to get a new computer because mine didn't work, and I'm told by the IT staff that they had no computers, partly because there's been a lot of freelance staff and they weren't getting the numbers down to supply the computers because suddenly someone would call up and say, I can't do the work unless you give me a computer. And there seemed to be a lack of transformation between hiring staff and telling the ICT people exactly who was eligible for a computer. I just make that observation.
I don't know if Kevin's got anything to say on that, but I know we have very good engagement with IT colleagues. As soon as a member of staff is appointed, we share that information with them, so there can be preparation. Well, I would say there are situations where even this morning where we've actually recruited somebody within social care. They want them to start next Monday. And on that basis, it's always going to be a quick turnaround. And we've been asked to do very quick safeguarding checks to make sure everything can actually be in place for that. So equally, there will be times when it is short notice. But I think from a systems perspective, it's actually moved on quite significantly over the last 9-12 months or so.
Okay, I think, any other questions? No? Robert?
Just an observation. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that with 5 county councils, goodness knows how many districts, 5 other unitaries in Berkshire, and the M4, M3 corridor allowing members of staff to commute into London boroughs, it's always going to be a real challenge to retain staff. And when I was chair of the Employment Committee, we introduced a system of golden handcuffs for children's social workers. There are lots of things that are going on, but until we get to a point where local authorities stop poaching staff by jacking up salaries because they've got a desperate need for staff because they're failing in certain areas, it's going to be a problem. We're a small unitary in a patchwork quilt of local authorities who at the moment are all competing for much sought after staff. And that isn't even beginning to talk about the private sector, which has deeper pockets and will be recruiting high quality, good staff who have got experience, particularly in planning and other areas like that.
Thank you. Mary, is it brief?
Yeah, can I just ask one question? When the children's social services got the outstanding and everything, there's always a balance between the people being poached because you've got this outstanding and the people encouraged to work in Bracknell Forest because it's an amazing place, they've got outstanding. So what has happened? How many left and how many come in?
I think it's a bit too early to say how many have left, but we do know that a number of individuals are being targeted by other organisations to come and work for them because of the status that they will have in Bracknell Forest now. But equally, it's a key part of our own recruitment tool in that where we stand at the moment as Bracknell Forest. And it is something we're keeping under review, Mary, but it is a challenge either way. And to be actually honest, we were experiencing that before the Ofsted inspection because the recognition that Bracknell Forest is a good place to work and we had high quality staff. So I think it's possibly been highlighted as a result of the inspection, but it was happening before.
Thank you. Right, I think we're going to move on. Can I thank everybody for the
Could I just
contribution?
make a final comment,
Yeah.
please, Chairman? First of all, at a personal level, can I thank Paul and Stuart for the input that they've had and the assistance they've given me during this period. The final comment I'd like to make is something that Tony touched on a moment ago, and Paul and I have talked about it over the past months, and I have used to talk about it to our previous chief executive. I do think there's a lot of potential mileage to be gained in trying to develop some kind of opportunity where the people that we've got could be multi-skilled. I think there is, and certainly in my own profession, we have found that giving people, whether they are trainees or people who are mid-career or whatever, the opportunity to have taster sessions or work with different departments and gain an overview, a holistic view of how the council works and how the various bits fit together can be a very useful and revealing exercise. I mean, I think, Paul, you briefly touched upon it when you mentioned how you found different skill sets that people have during the COVID pandemic. And my response to that is, why leave it at that? You know, why not seize or find some way to develop that further? Because if I can go back right to the early stages of the transformation process that we started in 2016 ago, one of the key things that I tried to drive down and through was, first of all, this multi-skilling. And if somebody is off work for a week or they work part-time, that the request doesn't lie on the desk for a week, nobody answering it, which is very, very frustrating for residents and certainly annoying to elected members. But also the fact that we needed to, as much as possible, while we'll always have specialisms, try to get away from this silo approach, which can be so inhibiting and discouraging for people who want to make a worthwhile career. So I just leave that general thought hanging in the air, and hopefully the chief executive can take some of it to mind and think about it. And thank you for your indulgence, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Leake, and your team. Thanks very much genuinely for the briefing and taking the questions. I'm sure we've all learnt something from it. If not just the thoughts that we have now been clarified of the problems. Nothing's easy, is it, when it comes to staffing, that's for sure. So thank you all very much. Moving on to item 8, if I may. First thing I'd like to do is to take, you have a scoping document there for Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny Panel. And I take it you've all read that scope. Is there anybody have any questions about that scoping document, or are we prepared to accept it as the guide for the work? Mike, did you want to say something?
Yes, Chair, if that's okay. Very briefly, while I have plenty of time because I'm stuck in a hotel in Manchester, I'm sure the rest of the panel would like to get on. As you've said, I'm assuming that people have read the scope, but there are two things that came out of conversations that we had yesterday as a panel. One is that we will be doing a case study, despite this being governance focused. That will be part of the scope that's going ahead. And secondly, we will be having a meeting specifically to discuss the equality impact assessment, which isn't in the scope at the moment, but it was raised as this will have possible impact in that area. It's something we will have a separate meeting looking at that. So, and I'd just like to thank those members that turned up yesterday who are here this evening.
Thank you, Mike. Members, are you happy to accept that scoping document? Or are there any other questions? Yes? Fine, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Then can we move on to updates? If I may, first of all.
Shall
Mike,
I continue
while you're
then?
there,
with my
do you want
updates
to give
for-
us your
while-
update?
Yes, just briefly. We had a review of the Blue Badge review yesterday with officers and members present, and we hope to have that meeting go forward sometime towards the end of this month, because a lot of the work that was done in the initial review is going live on the 22nd of November. So I will report more fully back, with your permission, after we've had that meeting on the review of Blue Badge.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll look forward to that.
Well,
that sounds very interesting.
there are some to future work, if you wanted, there are suggestions coming in. I know Councillor, I believe a couple of the councillors have already responded with possible future issues we might look at, but the adult safeguarding review will take us probably towards February 23, which means there won't be much time left unless there's some sort of joint project. I'm suggesting at some point, because this is the end of 4 years, that we actually review how scrutiny is looking and the lessons that we've learned from the scrutiny that we've undertaken. But that's just airing a thought rather than anything concrete on that. Other suggestions for what will be in the new cycle are being looked at, so that whoever comes in, whoever chairs it, there is some sort of research and scope has been started, so that whoever takes over in the new cycle, or if it's me, has a programme to continue with and hit the ground running. And that's my update. I've finished. Any questions? Hello?
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. We had a panel meeting on the 12th of October to look at what we've done and to set out priorities that we'd like to do, and our next steps. So we've had a good look at that, which I think will come out in the next meeting when we do a formal written ideas of what we're going to do going forward. So out of that came that we wanted to make sure that we were going to review the reports that we've done and to monitor them, the recommendations. So I think my Vice Chairman and I are going to, on the 16th of November, there's the Parish Liaison, and we're going to follow up about SIL. So that's the very first, and then we'll bring that back to the Commission. So we're doing that. And we're going to, the SEND report has been finished. It's gone through, as you know, the complete cycle now. It's gone through the executive. I was very lucky. I was interviewed by Radio Berkshire about it. So I think we had a lot of high profile about SEND, and I was really pleased with that. So we're going to review that in the first lot of recommendations were 6 months. So we are going to review that in February, about February, March. So I think that's really key. The child criminal exploitation, we've had our first meeting and that was really successful. And that actually led us forward to plan. We had 2 meetings of planning, actually how we're going to develop it more. And we've got 5 meetings, and the last one being the 1st of December, where we're going to do recommendations. So I think we're right on task with that, thanks to Joey. He's keeping us on task. I think we're quite busy, but we're yeah, we are. Thank you very much.
John?
Thank you, Chair. A brief one because it's getting on late. So I'm just going to stick to the enforcement strategy review. We had 2 meetings on the 26th of October, which were very successful in gathering evidence around the effectiveness of enforcement strategies across the different areas. Further data around the number of fines being issued with highways and transport is being collated, and that's going to go forward to the next meeting on the 24th of November. In addition to that, Sean Murphy will be presenting us around how fluid the public protection has to be regarding enforcement strategies. You know, things change daily, basically, within enforcement. So that's going to be a very useful one, and I'm going to open that up not only to the panel, but to every single member, because I think the more they know about enforcement and the strategies and what to look out for, I think it's very, very important. In Q4, we're going to try and do 2 reviews. I know we've only agreed 1 with Kevin, but going to try and do 2. One is the RSL, and I think the other one we need to come back to is the Salmon Creme, because that went out for, you know, to make sure that it fitted in with environmental health and everything else, and tests, and I believe that's all come back. So I think if we can try and get that in, then that'd be quite good. If not, then hopefully in May, whoever's the chair of the panel will be straight onto it. Thank you. Oh, no, yeah. And that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Are there any questions? No?
Could I just ask, Madam Chair? I'm really, I welcome you doing enforcement, actually. And so will you have sort of what I call perhaps an idiot's guide, so we know exactly, sometimes the pathways aren't very clear, or how, you know, we can actually do this. Will you have something like that?
We are hoping, but I think on the 26th of October it's quite an eye-opener regarding planning enforcement. So where you think it's going to be very easy to enforce on planning, it turned out to be it's basically one of the hardest to enforce. So you know, and again, it's like all these reviews, we think it's going to be very easy, like food waste, and it just opens up, you know, your eyes to everything. I think the enforcement is more within the public protection. Planning is a total different ball game, because there are so many loopholes or appeal processes that we all have to go through, and planning has the hardest time to enforce. So I think that will be a harder one, but with the public protection, there will certainly be a nice strategy for people to know what they can enforce and what is going to be enforced, and the successes that we're having, because we're already having a lot of successes with enforcement, and it's just putting that message out there that, you know, don't come to Bracknell Forest if you want to transgress.
John, just to say, could you also, can we just look at the fact that sometimes the councillors, because it affects the councillors in their own particular wards, obviously if it's planning or dump material or whatever, that there's a better transfer of information, because I know sometimes it goes to court and then they've got to get statements and they've got the information. It all takes a long time, but it would be good for the councillors to keep abreast of that, because sometimes you feel nothing's happening.
I think it'd be similar to the RSL one, whereby we developed a much better relationship with the providers, and then it gave a clear indication to members of who to approach and, you know, how to go about it. And I think that's part of the review, is to make sure that members are fully aware of the processes, who to contact, and the best department to contact. You know, unfortunately, there's about, I can't remember offhand, but there is a lot of enforcement that they can go about. So it's getting hold of the right officer or the right department. So that will be part of the review, and I'm sure that will come out as in the recommendations.
Hence the idiot's guide. Who to go to?
Sorry, Chair, I'm not calling all members idiots in this panel, thank you.
Okay, right. I think it just remains for me to remind members that the next meeting is the 12th of January. That's That's what it says here, so happy Christmas, yeah, and New Year. But can I thank everybody for their attendance this evening and contribution. Been a good meeting. Thanks very much indeed, and good night.